Hello, my name is Angelica, and I'm going to be performing a little bit of cognitive processing therapy tonight. Basically, the intention of cognitive processing therapy is to allow a person to remove any clouding thoughts or reasonings from an event or a period of time in their life that they endured pressure or trauma specifically. Now, for example, to use a more minor example, a child, for example, who is punched in the back of the head might in turn start believing, well, I was standing there, so I must have asked to be punched in the back of the head, or I, had my back turned, so I was asking for it because I wasn't on my guard, or I probably did something to those individuals to elicit this response, so they end up somehow making different rationales to excuse or to explain the behavior that ends up putting fault and blame on themselves. This is illogical because that action is remote from the person's ability to have had it happened. They themselves did not punch themselves in their own head. They were just standing there, and that does not elicit that reaction from the other person. Thus, their reasonings ultimately put themselves in undue stress. Thus, as an outsider person, as a third person, we can both clearly see that the child is not at fault for someone else coming along and acting violently against them. However, the child who's in that emotional state doesn't see that clearly. They are ultimately blaming themselves because they have to rationalize as to why this happened to that specific person. And as some notable therapists have stated before, typically the ideas that we are presented with, or the ideas that we are constantly fed, is that bad things happen to bad people and good things happen to good people. Thus, when a bad thing happens, we ultimately try to shame ourselves and blame ourselves and guilt ourselves into thinking we must have done something in order to elicit this bad response. And that is something that cognitive processing therapy tries to undo. They try to undo this negative or this illogical thought processes, so that way the person can identify objectively how exactly this is not their fault and how exactly they can move on from this and allow themselves to not have so many stuck points inside their head. Stuck points are points in a person's thought process that whenever it is presented, they immediately default or lock into a certain thought that keeps them at the mercy of their own self-judgment. That lock point could, for example, be, had I not been standing there, a kid would not have come up to me and punched me in the head. That could be a lock point. So the point that you need to address is the standing there point. And that's where you start kind of allowing the individual, which would be you in this instance, to write down why exactly that is, what exactly happened on a strictly factual point of view. Obviously details happen, obviously people can go off on tangents, but the objective is to keep it very factual. The next stuck point could be, I must have elicited the response, I must have done something to the person who struck me. That's a second stuck point, and it's often very common where someone believes that they have given some sort of encouragement or has elicited this response from someone else. This is the second stuck point that people will also describe in detail as to how exactly, or other occasions where, if by chance you believe that you elicited this response from someone else and this wasn't a measure that they responded with, or if this was something that has only happened once, yet you've behaved in the same way multiple times, and how is it that this only happened once? And it ends up going on and on with the description. So that's another stuck point that we'll analyze. So now that we've somewhat clarified, I would assume, this process, if this is clear, okay. Well, now that we've clarified it, the first step that I want you to undertake is going to be to write down your thought process. Write down the events and the details that happened to you, where if in the event that if this is a one solitary occasion or if this was over a period of time, to write down what exactly happened events-wise. Try not to go down any emotional or tangents. Try not to write down your thoughts. Try not to write down how you felt or why you thought that way and whatnot. That'll be dealt with individually. We're going to section this off. Try to write down only the events that happened. try to eschew certain thoughts or feelings that you had, only because those will be, as I've said before, dealt with and analyzed in sections. After you've written this down, we will analyze the stuck points that keep coming up, because they naturally will. And there we will analyze them as you write them down in different sections. So here is my little journal, and inside this journal is a pen. So what I want you to do is, for the moment being, I want you to hold this notebook and the pen and start writing down the details, the events of what happened. Just the events of what happened. And while you do that, I'm going to keep reminding you, verbally, vocally, that if there are stuck points that keep rising, if there's certain thoughts that keep rising, what I do want you to do is that at the bottom of the description, at the bottom of what happened, write down those stuck points. Write down exactly, if you can pinpoint an exact phrase that keeps looming, that keeps popping up, write it down at the bottom of the page. Typically common ones are, for example, in the case of a more serious form of assault, common ones are often, if I wasn't wearing this, or if I hadn't drunk that, or if I hadn't stayed up this late, or if I was just a little stronger. Those tend to be common stuck points in those circumstances. Or if it's over a long period of time, if I'd been more perceptive, if I'd been smarter, if I'd been stronger once again. Once again, these are stuck points that I want you to just write down at the bottom of the page, so that way we can start we can start chronicling its prevalence. If we note that it keeps coming up and 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 up, it's something that we will identify, it is something that we will manage, and it is something that we will tackle as we go along with this process. So, once again, keep writing, and as you keep writing this event, remember not to go down any emotional tangents. It'll cloud the logic. Obviously, it's something that we're going to be dealing with, and if it happens, once again, there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with you going down emotional tangents. There's nothing wrong with you detailing it further, what happened and how you felt. The objective, though, the goal is to try and be as objective with it as possible. If you can't, or if you just feel like you need to get it out of your chest, there's nothing wrong with it. And we will continue moving on and try the process over and over again until we get it to a satisfactory point for the both of us. So, keep writing the details, keep going. And as you keep going, try to note down the stuck points at the bottom of the page and try to list off the details as objectively as possible. As soon as you said, and I felt that, maybe if I hadn't, or what's another example? I think that, and then to ascribe, try to keep it as objective as possible. For example, going back to the example of the kid who got punched in the back of the head, I was walking out of school, I was going to the bus, I felt a punch to the back of the head, I turned around, I saw two girls behind me, and they were laughing, thus I concluded that these two girls punched me in the back of the head. Those are objective steps. That is a round summary of what happened without having to go down an emotional tangent. An example of an emotional tangent could be, I walked out of school, I was aiming for the bus, I felt a punch in the back of my head, I felt incredibly hurt, I felt someone had taken advantage, I felt someone had violated my space, etc., etc. I turned around, I saw them, I wasn't sure if it was them, I wasn't sure if they were the ones that punched me, I wasn't sure, blah, 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 blah. Those are sort of details that they're subjective, they're not factual, they're not supporting the reality of what happened. Those are your illogical, subjective thought processes that are clouding your judgment to realize that what happened wasn't your fault. Your judgment was initially rather not initially, but your judgment will be correct. And noting that they hit you and your initial judgment, I suppose, of them hitting you was correct. It was your second guessing, it was your doubt that left you at the mercy of your thoughts. So, let me look over your description if you're done. And are you comfortable with me looking over your description? Excellent. I hope there is a high level of trust between us, considering how I do intend to help you. I'm going to look over the details, and as I look over the details, remind yourself of these objective facts. Think over them, over them, over them, over them. Consider them over and over again. Think about how this point happened, this point happened, this point happened, and this point happened in time, without thinking about your doubts, your insecurities, your feelings at the time. Just consider those objective facts if you're comfortable with it. As I look over